Lads, what's the crack? Welcome back to another haircutting tutorial, and in this one we're going to cover how I done this mod cut. This is a style that we're seeing a lot more over the last year or two, and one that can be a bit confusing if you haven't actually learned how to do it. So hopefully it can help somebody that maybe struggles with it. Let's get stuck on this. So this was the length that we started off with, and my client hadn't had a haircut in a few months, so it was overgrown. And usually he told me he gets a short back and sides, but this time we've seen a few inspirational pieces online that were more towards a mod style, and he wanted to give that a go. So the first thing I want to do here is just divide this into a simple box section on the top, which is going to separate the top from the back and sides. Once we've done that, then we're actually going to make our first cut, and we're going to do this below the crown at the back and working around the head in a round shape around the contour on the sides. And what this is going to do, this is actually going to dictate the shape that we are going to layer into the back of the head, which is then going to help us through the sides as well. So working on the back of the head, we're actually going to use that guide that we just cut, and I want to take vertical sections, cutting this vertically square but horizontally round. The reason I want to cut this vertically square is because I actually want to keep some of the length around the exterior of the haircut, and the reason I want to cut it horizontally round is because of what we're actually trying to create here. So a mod cut, in my opinion, is something that's a bit balanced on the back and sides of the head, so I want to avoid actually creating any corners here. One thing I'd like you to notice as well too is that I'm using a point cutting technique, and although there's many different styles of a mod haircut, the ones that I like the best are usually ones that are heavily texturized. So if I can add some texture as we go and cut the shape onto the sides here and back, then I'm going to do that and leave it easier when it comes to actually refining the haircut at the end. So I'm still using my vertical sections here, and for anybody that doesn't understand this technique or process, I've actually made a separate video talking about a round shape and how to actually do this process. So what that's going to do is actually break it down into simple steps for you, and I think it would be a good one to watch before actually doing a haircut like this. But for anybody following along, once I complete that process, I'm actually just going to cross check my work to make sure everything's balanced before moving on to the side of the head. Right, so now that we're moving on to the side, I'm actually going to cut this a bit different, and one of the main changes here is I'm actually going to use horizontal sections instead of vertical sections, and what that's going to allow me to do is actually going to keep a bit more weight working through the sides of the head here, because I noticed that the client's hair is slightly on the finer side, and if I cut this horizontally, it's actually going to reduce a lot of that weight that I want to keep. I'm elevating each section into the next, making sure that I'm cutting at 90 degrees from the head. So we are still layering here, but because we're cutting in horizontal sections, it's actually stacking the layers on top of each other. Once we get to the top of the head, or the contour of the head, this is actually going to be where we cut our original guide at the very start, so there's not going to be much length to actually come off. But one thing I'm thinking about here is actually over-directing the hair back, just so we can create a small bit of strength at the rounding of the head. The next part, what we're going to do here is use our feller razor just to personalize the exterior of the haircut, and this is probably one of my favorite things to do, especially with this style. A mod cut has a very natural finish to the outline of the haircut, and what I'm thinking about here is chipping away at anything that's too bulky, just to leave a really shattered finish and to help create something that just looks a bit more edgy. Moving on to the top, one of the first things that my client said that I actually wanted or liked about his hair was a longer fringe. He said that it was starting to annoy him getting under his eyes, so one thing that we agreed on was taking it just above his eyebrows, and I'm going to use the feller razor again here to actually break up the fringe and add a bit more texture to it. So when I was actually taking my section for the fringe, I took it in a deep diagonal position. So what that's going to do is allow me to actually control the density in the recession areas. Another thing that I actually want to make sure that I'm doing here when I'm cutting the fringe is ensure that I'm actually making this a round shape. So one way that I can do that is by my body positioning, making sure that I take a step to the left or right when I'm actually creating the shape of the fringe. And then for the lengths that actually fall on top of the fringe, I'm using a slight elevation here too, just to add some softness so it doesn't sit so heavy. Now that we've done that, we're going to take a profile guide right through the center of the head vertically, and what this is going to do is allow us to actually assess the lengths that we've cut through the front. And what I'm going to do here is actually let the lengths of the fringe drop that I want to keep, and use the longest of the shortest pieces as our guide for the rest of the head. So the way I'm going to cut this on top is actually vertically square, but again horizontally round. So because there's so much length actually kept through the fringe, I want to keep some heaviness through the back of the head as well too, but where the head actually starts to round off on the horizontal plane, I want to actually take some of that weight out and have it a bit more rounded and a bit more of a flow to it. So working forward here, I'm simply just using horizontal sections and using that first initial vertical section as my guide. So now that we're coming to the end of the haircut, we've put on the shape. I just want to actually dry it off slightly before going in and using a point cutting technique to add some more texture to the top. So this is what I would call the refining phase. And at the end of every haircut, I'm always going to go back and add a bit of personality to the haircut in a way that I think is going to suit the client. In this case, it's going to be loads of texture. So really to finalise now, I'm just going to add some product. And what I used here was a paste, which has a medium hold. The reason I wanted to use this was just to bring out that texture that we just put on. And lads, that's the end result. That's just how I would break down a mod haircut in this situation. But if you got anything from that or you enjoyed it, leave me a comment below. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. And if you're new to my page, hit subscribe and I'm sure I'll post more of this kind of stuff. See you.